What's up guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we have a very special three-way comparison of my brand new Acura Integra Type S versus a Camaro SS 1LE versus a Cadillac CT4-V Blackwing. I'm sure no one has ever done this three-way comparo before, and you might be wondering what in the world do these cars have in common with each other? Well, maybe not so much the Camaro versus the Cadillac since they both are on the GM Alpha platform, but why is my Integra in the mix? And I'll tell you exactly why. One very simple reason, and that is the fact that I cross-shopped all three of these cars when looking to replace my Subaru BRZ with a dual-purpose daily driver and track capable vehicle. Now these three cars are at fairly different price points. My Integra, the MSRP was around $52,000. This 2017 SS 1LE can be found for around $35,000 to $40,000 on the used market. And the brand new CT4-V Blackwing has a base price of around $61,000, but the owner spec'd his out to $65,000. I want to see at each of those price points, what are some of the pros and cons, specifically in terms of driving dynamics on a canyon road. All three of these vehicles have been given a lot of praise for their ability to do that dual duty kind of use case where you have a refined interior, good ride quality with adaptive suspension, modern technology, but when you take it on a canyon road or racetrack, these cars all really come alive. So they say. So let's start with a Camaro. This thing, of course, is powered by the tried and true 6.2 liter small block V8, making 455 horsepower, 455 pound-feet of torque. It weighs almost 3,800 pounds. A 6-speed manual is your only choice of transmission. We have a limited slip differential. And with this 1LE package, you get a lot of performance-focused goodies. The Magna Ride suspension, bigger brakes, better cooling, a shorter final drive. This car really is focused on giving you as much performance for the money as possible. Now, just a quick word on the interior. I absolutely love these Recaro seats. The side bolstering here for my back is just right. Overall, it holds me in really, really well, and it's very comfortable. Interior feels modern, but slightly on the cheaper side in terms of build quality. Some of these buttons don't feel all that expensive, but overall, for the money, I think you get what you pay for. And being a 2017 model year, this is, of course, the pre-facelift of the Gen 6 SS 1LE. Small block V8 barks to life. We're going to put this thing into track, and then we'll double tap the traction control button, which gives us the ability to choose between wet, dry, Sport 1, Sport 2, and race. We are going to try Sport 2, which should still give us some slip angle. Not my first time behind the wheel of an SS 1LE. I have driven one a couple of times, but it's always good to revisit one of my favorite American cars ever, especially for the money. Good steering feel. It loads up really nicely in the corners. This also comes with auto rev match, but we've turned that off. We're on Goodyear Eagle F1 Super Sport tires, a nice and grippy summer compound. Excellent brake feel, high effort but very satisfying to use manual transmission. This car just has really excellent driver inputs for a modern car. Everything just feels so dialed in. 7,000 RPM redline, but really don't have to rev it out that high. Lots of torque in the low end and mid-range. Really good steering feel. Again, the front end of this car is just so sharp. Perfect throttle response, easy to heel toe. Oh man, it really just feels so dialed in. But before we find some more corners to attack, let's do a little good old-fashioned straight line pull. The gearing is a little bit long. Even with the shorter final drive of the 1LE package. But there's no denying that this engine can still make use of its torque curve with the long gears. Lots of grip, lots of mid-corner balance. just a fantastic driving experience. Everything feels so linear. The driver inputs and how they relate to what the car does, it feels one-to-one. The steering, the shifter, the throttle response, the brakes, even the clutch feel is excellent. Oh yes. This is what it's all about for me, this front engine rear drive feel with lots of front grip and a good amount of rear grip, but not too much. I like the ability to throttle steer the car, even at moderate speeds. The limits of this car are high, but not so high that you can't explore them on a public road. That's what I love about the SS1LE on street tires. And for the money, this thing is an absolute bargain. I know I'm kind of getting ahead of myself with the conclusion here, but even without driving the other two cars in this comparison, this car on its own is such a good value. $35,000 to $40,000 gets you a truly fantastic driving machine. It's so well balanced. Do I wish it was a little bit lighter? Yeah, I mean, close to 3,800 pounds. This thing's a bit of a porker for sure, but it does a pretty good job hiding the weight. And I think that comes down to the driver inputs as well as the front to rear balance. This GM Alpha platform really does a good job at communicating what the front and rear ends of the car are doing in relation to each other. You can be very progressive with your inputs and the car responds exactly how you want. And that's one of the biggest signs of an excellent driver's car. One more straight line pull, just for the sound of that glorious V8. America, baby. This car is a definition of red, white, and blue, engineered to perfection. Is the visibility limited from inside the cockpit? Yes. And actually, it's not so much the side and rear visibility that bothered me. It's the fact that this hood for the gauge cluster is blocking my view of the road in front. Just slightly annoying. I could see it getting old for daily driving. But before we jump to any real conclusions, let's get into the Integra and the CT4-V Blackwing and see how they compare. All right, I changed my mind last second and decided to do the CT4-V Blackwing next. Figured it made more sense because we can directly compare how these two different models, both based on the GM Alpha platform, feel in terms of driving dynamics. Like I mentioned, this one has been spec'd out to around $65,000. The owner, Ramana, mentioned that just these seats alone were about a $3,000 upgrade. So we're powered by a 3.6 liter turbocharged V6. It makes 472 horsepower, 444 pound-feet of torque. This car weighs just under 3,900 pounds, which is only about 100 pounds heavier than that two-door Camaro. So power to weight as well as torque to weight are virtually identical between these two cars. 6-speed Tremec manual transmission, just like the Camaro, electric power steering, brake-by-wire, which I'm very curious about to see if it feels natural or not. First impressions of the interior, it's definitely a big step up from that 2017 SS1LE, but in terms of build quality and materials, it's actually very close, I would say, to my Integra Type S. There are a few things I like about this one better, like the carbon fiber along the center console here, but I do prefer the Type S's larger infotainment display and the perforated leather on the steering wheel. I'm nitpicking here though. I think both interiors feel about what you'd expect for the amount of money you're paying. Now, let's fire this thing up and see how it drives. We do have some very sophisticated drive modes. We're going to use the V button and we're going to set it to our preferred setting here. Steering, suspension, engine sound in the max setting, PTM, one setting below max, and then brake feel in the middle setting. Gearing is similarly long to the Camaros. Actually, brake feel is really good. It feels natural. I can't even tell it's brake-by-wire. Oh, there's something flying around in the back seat there. This turbo V6 actually doesn't feel heavily turbocharged. There's not a whole ton of lag down low. It feels pretty linear in the way it pulls. I do think steering feel is a little lacking compared to the Camaros, to be honest. Plenty of power from this V6. Again, it really feels naturally aspirated. I don't feel hardly any turbo lag, and the throttle response is on point. Does it make a great sound? You be the judge, but I don't think it makes anywhere near as exciting of a sound as a 6.2 liter small block. Not a bad sound per se, but there's a little bit of artificial noise being piped through the speakers. Really nice rotation under throttle. Not to the point of oversteer right now, but the rear end just, it wants to help you turn the car. Oh yes. We're on Michelin PS4S tires. Plenty of grip for this road. Steering feel is not nearly as good as the Camaros, like I said. Doesn't load up as well in the corners. Car also doesn't feel quite as playful, even though we have the PTM almost turned completely off, similar to what we had in the Camaro. I know the weight is only about 100 pounds more, but it doesn't feel as responsive. I wonder if that's due to the tire size. We're on a staggered 255 front, 275 rear. The front just feels slightly dull, and that's relative, keep that in mind. It's still a very sharp feeling front end for a 3,900 pound sedan. It does still feel like it's on the same platform as the Camaro, and it shares a lot of similarities. The way the front talks to the rear, excellent suspension as well. These Magnaride dampers, not sure if they're a newer generation, but in this car it might actually feel a little bit more daily driver friendly. It's a little bit more refined. Oh yeah, the suspension handled that bump beautifully back there. Magnaride dampers, they're just the best of the best for OEM adaptive suspension. Once I hop into my Integra, I'll be curious to see how that system compares. If only this thing had a small block V8. And I know there's good reasons why GM went with the V6. It's a little bit smaller, and I know they designed the V6 with some pretty special parts, titanium connecting rods, and they were able to achieve more or less the same power output as that 6.2 liter V8, but I just missed the sound. I mean, listen to this V6. Not a bad sound, but after hopping out of that Camaro, I just miss that glorious small block. There's no two ways about it. So if there was a downside to this car, it would be the engine character. Also, the steering feel, like I mentioned, is slightly numb compared to the SS1LE. Everything else, though, feels virtually the same. I suspect if we were to put a 275 section width tire on the front to give it a square setup, even the front end response would feel virtually the same. But we actually have a full-size back seat. Raman has got his baby seat back there. The interior is much better. We have a newer infotainment system. Overall, this is a noticeably more refined car, and visibility is way, way better. Is this a $65,000 driving experience? Absolutely, especially if you need the practicality. But at $35,000 to $40,000, the SS1LE does give you an even more exciting driving experience. So if that's your priority, you don't need usable back seats, and you don't mind the visibility challenges, the SS1LE definitely is a more exciting performance car. The Cadillac is more compromised in that regard, but not by a whole lot. But with that being said, it's time to hop into my Type S and see if I bought the wrong car. All right, last but not least, my 2024 Integra Type S. I've only driven this car in the canyons once, but today we are really putting it through its paces against two of the best GM products from the last 10 years. So the Integra Type S, at its MSRP of around $51,000 to $52,000, does it split the difference between the Camaro and the Cadillac? Obviously, this has a 4-cylinder engine, it's front-wheel drive. You can point out all day long that it's based on a Honda Civic, but at the end of the day, what matters is how it drives. 2-liter K20C turbocharged inline-4 engine, 320 horsepower, mechanical limited slip differential, 6-speed manual is your only choice of transmission, adaptive suspension, but they're not the fancy MagneRide shocks found in the GM products. This car weighs just over 3,200 pounds, so it's 500 to 700 pounds lighter than those other two cars. Let's see how all of those differences affect the driving feel. From an interior standpoint, I actually prefer this Integra over the Cadillac. I think it just has a slightly simpler, cleaner, more refined design. I'm not talking about necessarily build quality. There's a lot of piano black plastic here, which I'm not a fan of, but just how this interior looks visually, I think is a cut above even the Cadillac. And the touch points, the steering wheel, the shifter, the infotainment display do feel just a little bit higher quality to me. We're gonna put this thing into Sport Plus, which gives us the best throttle response. It opens up the exhaust valves, it stiffens up the suspension, and it makes the steering a little bit heavier. All right, front wheel drive versus front engine rear wheel drive. Did I choose the wrong car? Will it put a $52,000 smile on my face? Let's find out. Little bit of torque steer. Right away, this car feels so much lighter and more nimble than the other two. 500 to 700 pounds lighter, that's no joke. Brake feel is honestly just as good as the Camaros, and better than the Cadillacs, I would say. Steering feel, better than the Cadillacs, not as good as the Camaros. It weights up nicely in the corners, but doesn't give quite as much feedback. Gotta love this brake feel though. And this amazing mechanical 6-speed manual doing its job brilliantly. Auto rev match turned off, and the throttle response from this little turbo 4-banger is really excellent in the higher RPMs. Keep it above around 3,500 and you get good response. And with the adaptive dampers in the stiffest setting, which is Sport Plus, this doesn't feel any less sophisticated than the MagneRide shocks in either of the other two cars. These are a much more basic adaptive damper technology, but from behind the wheel it feels just as good. All right, first gear, 4,000 RPM. Pulls hard to around 6,500. Lots of torque in that mid-range. Easy to heel toe. Love this 6-speed manual. The manuals in those other two cars are fantastic, but this one just has a delicate yet still mechanical and solid feeling to it that I prefer. It's a little bit lower effort, but no less engaging. Haha. Just a hint of wheel spin in second gear. But honestly, this thing puts the power down shockingly well. little bit of understeer there on throttle. I am not having any less fun than I was in those other two cars. If anything, I think this is a little bit more fun at canyon speeds, mind you, not on the track, compared to the CT4-V Blackwing. I think the Camaro is still a cut above just because of that perfect front to rear balance, combined with the fact that it's rear wheel drive with a lot of torque. You can really just play with little bits of oversteer even at lower speeds in that car. Obviously that's not happening with the Integra being an FF layout, and the Cadillac just didn't have that same focused feeling. By the way, I found out from Suresh after I drove the SS1LE that he does have the track alignment on the car, which you can do with the factory parts, by the way. That might just explain the difference at the front ends. Ooh. Okay, right there on that big bump, this suspension didn't feel quite as good as the MagneRide, at least in the Cadillac. I would say I think this feels slightly better than the MagneRide in the SS1LE. I don't know if that's a MagneRide generational difference, but I think this suspension splits the difference between those two cars. Honestly, I'm really impressed with the Integra. It's such a well dialed in driving machine. It's not an oversteer monster, and FF never will be unless you take it to the extreme with mods. And even then, it's going to be lift-off oversteer, not power oversteer. And so, yeah, I am missing a little bit of that. But the rest of the car, the driver inputs, the suspension, and the way the car responds to what I ask of it, they're so well dialed in that I can actually overlook the fact that this is not a rear-wheel drive car. Will that change once I take this thing on track? We'll find out in about a month. But from where I'm sitting right now on a canyon road, this Integra really does feel like a $52,000 driving experience. That being said, this seat makes me so sad. I wish this just kept the Civic Type R seat. I get it, they wanted to move to a more luxurious seat. It's power adjustable, it has heating, but there's no memory seat function, there's no cooled seat function, and so there's not really that big of an advantage to having this seat, and the disadvantage is huge. They don't hold me in whatsoever compared to the Civic Type R, and that's a big bummer for me. That aside, Integra Type S, I think, really does hold its own at its price point. If you want pure thrills and you're able to give up some of that daily drivability and comfort, SS1LE still is a fantastic value and a bargain at 35 to 40 grand. The Cadillac gives you 80 to 85% of the driving thrills with a lot more daily drivability and creature comforts and space. So if that's what you want, you got to pay the price, $65,000 to $70,000 with some options. But for me right now, I'm pretty damn happy saying that I own an Integra Type S. Let me know what you think about these three cars and how they compare. Are there any better options for a dual purpose vehicle in this general ballpark of price? Thank you guys for watching. A big thank you to Suresh and Ramana, and I'll see you guys in the next one.